ahead and get started if you guys are all gathered. So we're going to be looking at adequate sponsor monitoring systems in anticipation of FDA-sponsored GCP inspections. So as you guys had mentioned, looking at the potential for inspections. So we are looking at the FDA's Compliance Program Guidance Manual, how the FDA will conduct their inspection of a sponsor, CRO, or monitor, as well as the FDA's final guidance for risk-based monitoring that was put out in August of 2013. So we will look at BIMO's Sponsor, CRO, and Monitor Program, identify components of a sponsor monitoring system beyond the standard operating procedures. We'll talk about the FDA's expectations for sponsor SOPs or CRO SOPs surrounding monitoring procedures and activities. We'll look at adequate oversight of non-employee performers. So what do the regulations say? What do the guidelines say about control of those with whom we work? We'll look at other measures to ensure quality monitoring and evaluate gaps in our current monitoring systems. So unfortunately, one of the top findings over the last many years for sponsors and CROs from an FDA perspective in terms of the volume of citations in 483s is failure to ensure proper monitoring, followed very closely by failure to secure investigator compliance, which really go hand in hand. So we're going to talk about the responsibilities from a regulatory perspective of monitoring. We will also mention that we have had updates to ICH E6 under Revision 2 that include information about risk-based monitoring. So really, for one of the few times where the FDA was much further ahead of ICH in terms of putting that out there, looking at quality management, pulling all of that into it. So we're still waiting for the FDA to come up with something about that, which they said that they have been thinking about. But what we're pushing towards is that when we are working in this environment, that the responsibility of getting credible data from protected subjects belongs to each of us, and we have to be proactive in our approach. So I want to do a quick survey from you to see how many of you are familiar with these compliance program guidance manuals. So these are the FDA's SOPs, if you will, for how they're going to conduct their inspections. So give me a green check if you're familiar with them, a red X if not. All right, so those feedback buttons are down there. Okay, great, thanks. And so we have the update from 2017, April, which for sponsors, CROs, and monitors. So this included information about the final rule for clinicaltrials.gov registration and results reporting. So we had an update. Prior to this, these had been updated in 2011. This particular one had been updated in 2011. We also have the FDA's Compliance Program Guidance Manual for clinical investigators that was updated in 2008. So going back to our slide deck. Slide number 3, what is monitoring? ICH defines monitoring as the act of overseeing the progress of that clinical trial and making sure that it is conducted in accordance with the requirements that we have established, whether they be regulatory, SOPs, protocol, guidelines, what have you. Monitors are going in and making sure once we've defined the parameters of responsibility that those things are being followed. We certainly make things easier for them if we've pre-established, pre-identified those requirements and given them the tools to make sure that they can assess them. So monitoring is really quality control, which are the operational techniques and activities undertaken within a quality assurance system to make sure that requirements have been met. When we go into a site, for example, we are not just monitoring that site. We are monitoring the auditing, the engagement with the sponsor, the engagement with the IRB, the engagement with any ancillary vendors that the sponsor might have established, that the investigator might be using, that the institution might be using. So when we are auditing that quality assurance piece, we're really kind of that umbrella of assessing compliance across the board from beginning to end. Monitoring is that check of what's happening in real time. We have to think about who is responsible for what in clinical research. We know that we can transfer responsibilities to CROs under 21 CFR 312 for drugs and biologics. Sorry for the formatting on this. Apparently when we transferred it, we got a gap there. A transfer of obligations to a CRO. So under 21 CFR 312, sponsors can transfer regulatory obligations to CROs who are willing to accept it. Everything has to be documented. Going with that old adage, if it's not documented, it's not done. So there need to be written procedures for monitoring the investigation, and the name and the address of a monitor in the investigational plan for our devices. That needs to be added into that. So we have a responsibility for identifying who is going to be doing what. However, under 21 CFR 812 for devices, we don't have that transfer of responsibilities, that transfer of regulatory obligations to a CRO.